All right. Well, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on. I thought we might start. Let's just start with your background as an athlete yourself. What were you doing? What have you been doing all your life?
Yeah, no, thanks, Greg, firstly for having me on board. Yeah, for me as an athlete, I guess I've had a pretty mixed background. I guess being a Kiwi, rugby and cricket have always been foundational growing up. So I guess that's what I started off with. But yeah, as I got older, I mean, I've always had a massive passion and fascination around people lifting heavy things. So I got into weightlifting relatively later on in life, so Olympic weightlifting that was, and that really fascinated me as a sport. As I mentioned, I was as a kid watching the Olympics early on, and weightlifting was one of those events that I always gravitated towards watching, and was fascinated by that. And then I guess over the years, like being a weightlifter, anything endurance based, we often joke that anything over five reps was considered, endurance work for us or aerobic work. So I never did any form of running, mate, or any of that stuff other than in rugby. But then in my career, I moved to work in professional rugby for a number of years. So when I transitioned into that sport, I figured, well, geez, I want to actually do some of these conditioning sessions that I'm prescribing to the players. So then I started running and absolutely fell in love with it. So almost did a complete 180-degree flip from doing, all strength power based work to pulling that right back and just really focusing on running, and went quite deep into that. So went from going to just sort of half marathons all the way up to ultra marathon distances. And then yeah, Hyrox came up on my radar, and I guess that as you all know is the perfect blend of the two worlds. So that's brought me to the space now.
Yeah, perfect. When you were saying that about rugby, I was just thinking like it's surprising there's not more rugby players at the top end in Hyrox, isn't it?
Oh,
Do you feel
mate.
like it's a surprise?
Well, yes, 100%. Yes, I completely agree with you. And Piers Plowman, one of our colleagues in Hyrox, we've discussed this a lot, and especially and I've mentioned this previously to other people as well, like with Hyrox's push to become an Olympic sport in 2032. I really, 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 truly believe you'll see a massive influx of rugby players coming across, and I'm predicting more so rugby sevens as opposed to the traditional 15 game. So I guess for some of the listeners that aren't too familiar with the differentiation between those two forms of rugby, other than one has 15 players per team versus the other being seven. The sevens format is more accustomed to high speed, repeat efforts. It's a shorter game in total, but the fitness demands of those seven individuals on the field and strength and power requirements would really be attuned to that of Hyrox. So I reckon that, especially in New Zealand, where rugby is just, we're fanatical about that, I think we will see a lot more footy players, in particular the sevens, male and female, coming across.
Yeah. Just saying that, I've just remembered actually Josh Van Zeeland as a rugby background, doesn't he?
Yes,
And I
that's
think he
right.
said
Yeah,
he
that's
done
right.
some seven stuff actually. So yeah,
Oh.
there's one. Um, how about as a coach? Like, so you've moved into the coaching world. Was that in rugby as well?
Yeah, yes, yeah, a little bit. So rugby was more so in the strength and conditioning phase. I am the coach of my son's rugby team, so I'll claim that hands down, 100%. But yeah, my coaching was I started my coaching off being the head coach for the New Zealand weightlifting team. So that was for a period from end of 2008 all the way through to 2016. So again, that my goal, like growing up as a kid that loved sport, was to one day go to the Olympics as an athlete, but unfortunately that never came to fruition. So again, very fortunate to head across to the London Olympics and Rio Olympics in 2016 as the coach for the New Zealand weightlifting team. So yeah, I mean that really sort of was a full circle for me in terms of my areas of passion. And I mean, coaching I think is it's just really at the core of me. Like I often say to my athletes that I get more passion and excitement and seeing them do well as opposed to, out of my own competitions when I compete myself. So, yep. So that was me in terms of the coaching front. And then as mentioned, I moved into more of a support role in other sports. So being the strength and conditioner for a couple of different Olympic campaigns, but also with the New Zealand America's Cup team. So that was a little bit left field, being, a weightlifting coach, then working in the high performance world of competitive sailing, which is great. But now in Hyrox, I've got my own coaching business in Durox with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Dan Plews, as well.
Okay. Any particular fond memories from like Olympics, anything like that that sticks in your mind?
Yeah, absolutely, man. And like as mentioned, I guess, childhood dream and to have that come to fruition and going to those events is firstly, massive. But I think even, for me, I went to, two Commonwealth Games, and that was probably one of the real amazing fond memories for me, because for me, my coach was Nigel Avery. And I know we sort of talk about heroes and stuff later on in the chat, but Nigel Avery, for me, was one of my heroes, growing up, because he was a fantastic weightlifter himself. I remember watching him win Commonwealth Games gold medals, and he went to the Sydney Olympics. So again, I looked up to him so much as his athlete prowess. But then being coached by Nigel, I learnt so much from him as a coach, and even to the point that we named our daughter after him. And people say, "You named your daughter Nigel?" I'm like, "No, we named her Avery." So Avery's her name. So for me, when we went to the Commonwealth Games, I was very fortunate to have a number of fantastic athletes and managed to coach them to Commonwealth Games medals. So again, I think there was, again, I talk about full circles, but that was another one of sort of those full circle experiences where, I really idolized Nigel and what he'd done on the Commonwealth and Olympic stage. And then I was able to play a role in supporting other athletes sort of achieve that kind of level, which was really cool.
Okay, awesome. I was probably going to get to this a little bit later, but as you mentioned it, what was it about his coaching in particular that you found so great?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess he was a fantastic blend of a number of things. So obviously he had done, everything that we'd wanted to aspire to, representing New Zealand at the Commonwealth, winning medals, but also going to the Sydney Olympics. So he had that amount of prestige on his athlete CV, so to speak. But I guess it would be easy for a number of athletes or even players, if they go from player to coach, to them to always lean on that sort of previous experience, whereas Nigel was able to almost segregate that. Yes, he had that as a foundation, but then he was also had the amazing ability to really tailor his approach to the different athletes that he worked with. So, I guess he taught me, as an athlete, he taught me obviously the technical skills of weightlifting, but I also learned so much from him in terms of, how to perform under pressure, how to basically manage different athletes, how to manage different groups. So a lot of his coaching philosophies that he obviously imparted onto me, I then took on with my own coaching approach. And again, hence the reason why, like, he made such an impact on me as a person. Just to name our daughter after him, or Avery, that was a real good testament and just a reminder for us.
Yeah. And then Hyrox came around, like it came to that area of the world, did it? And you just gave it a go, fell in love?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I'd sort of saw it bubbling up around the world. And at that point in time, like as mentioned, I was still just heavily involved in my running. And I could see it sort of around the different around the globe, sorry, being put up. And then, as mentioned, Dr. Dan Plews, or Dan, he's my good mate and colleague, and he decided to give it a crack. And so I helped Dan train for his first his comp, and he absolutely smashed it. And Dan, I know you've had him on your podcast before, and for those who aren't too familiar with Dan, I mean, he's from an amazing Ironman background, so he's an absolute walking weapon. So again, like when he made that transition across to the sport, he just did phenomenal. So again, like we then decided to create Endurox, our coaching business, and he's like, "Well, mate, you need to get some racing under your belt." So yeah, just went full noise into it, and yeah, have fallen in love with the sport.
Okay, amazing. So let's talk about strength. Like you come from a strength and conditioning background. Talk about strength, like coaching in Hyrox. Um, what do you? I've got a ton of questions to be fair around this, but what do you feel about like just training for max strength and how that carries over to Hyrox? Do you feel like that's important? Like, are you doing a lot of, you know, less than 5 reps, for example, in your training, or do you feel like that's not necessary for something like Hyrox?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it definitely has its time and place. It's got its level of importance. How much emphasis people place on it, I guess that's the next question to really dive into. So max strength 100% has applications. So when you look at, for example, the key events like Sled Push comes to mind is going to be definitely a strength driven station. But strength alone is not going to be the differentiator, because it's basically how well you retain that strength under fatigue is going to be the critical variable. So even you could have two athletes of the same overall strength level, but one's going to outperform another in competition because their fatigue tolerance or their percentage of strength retained is going to be better. So unless you've got that good base of strength, you may not be able to work on that fatigue tolerance. So that goes back to the question, yes, you do need to spend some good dedicated time working on the max strength stuff, which again is typically, as you reference, that kind of 1 to 3 rep range or 3 to 5 RM range. But then that's only going to be during a certain phase of your build up. After that, you then do need to start specializing into how you're going to keep that expression going throughout the duration of that beautiful sled push, as an example.
And so, like fatigue tolerance, if someone feels like they struggle with that, are there any specific? I mean, I'm sure it's a big answer, really, but like, is there a way of improving your fatigue tolerance?
Yeah, definitely. Like it comes down to, I mean, some people are better attuned to that through their machinery, like in terms of their muscle fiber types. So typically, broadly speaking, you've got 3 main fiber types: your slow twitch, and then your two fast twitch fiber types. So some people that have more the preference towards that type 2A, they've got a good level of fatigue resistance, versus someone that's like a pure fast twitch, they will perform better. But in saying that, specific training, so that kind of, we term it strength endurance training, so that kind of 15 to 20 to even 30 rep range, you're working for time. So sets of 2-minute squats, as an example, as opposed to your traditional rep driven squats or sets, that will definitely help build that tolerance. Another critical thing I think, people need to really bear in mind is sometimes with that fatigue resistance training, they're always trying to take it to that red line point of failure in the hope that's going to further improve that fatigue resistance, which doesn't necessarily always occur. Because one other thing to always bear in mind, and often say this to our athletes as well, is that, Hyrox is definitely a power endurance sport. So power endurance meaning that how often you can perform relatively high power outputs repeatedly. So in saying that, your ability to replenish, for example, your phosphocreatine system is going to be massive. So in order for you, as an example, to help, further enhance your replenishment rate of phosphocreatine, that involves you performing sort of moderately to high intensity efforts, but then having relatively structured rest periods as well. And during those structured rest periods, you could be pairing it up with, for example, low intensity aerobic work. But again, it's the pairing of those two which will then help, further enhance your phosphocreatine replenishment rate, which again will help contribute to that fatigue resistance.
Okay. And so you just mentioned like rest periods in something like that type of training. Then would rest
Mm.
periods typically be reasonably low?
Yep.
Yeah, with like higher rep, a few sets, but relatively low rest periods, or actually some sort of aerobic work during the rest.
Yes, yeah. So you can definitely do, during specific phases of training, you can have relatively short rest periods. I mean, we're talking sort of 30-second periods between, for example, strength endurance work, or, during specific phases, if, as mentioned, like that phosphocreatine replenishment, that's the goal for you to work on, then you'd be looking to have, upwards of, say, 2, maybe 3-minute rest periods, and you can perform some light aerobic work during that period of time as well. So again, pairing up the two, and that'll help sort of buffer out that build on phase as well.
Yeah. Where do you think about strength work and this sort of type of work? Um, like in terms of like your training week, how does that fit in alongside like running training, for example? Do you try and separate it as much as possible? Do you do it on the same day? Like, do you leave hours between it? Like, yeah, how do you think about that? Does one impact the other?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, 100%. I mean, the concept of it's termed either concurrent training, or people reference the interference effect come into play. And I guess historically, prior to hybrid work or hybrid sports, I guess especially in the strength and conditioning world or coaching world, people would really look to segregate those two forms of work. You'd have your endurance based work on a separate day, or very much well spread out from your strength work, because you didn't want either of or those to compromise each other. So again, the concurrent effect is true. We do get a bit of butting of the heads from a molecular signaling point of view. I guess when we see that butting of heads occur is typically when endurance intensity is high, or endurance volume is long, or you're trying to work the same muscle groups on the same given day. Those would be the three kind of classical factors that really result in, as mentioned, that butting of heads in terms of our adaptation responses. But in saying that, so how it typically works is endurance will basically spike up a molecular pathway that's driven by, it's called AMPK. And basically that pathway there will be switched on through a number of factors. So when energy sources or energy stress becomes high, so glycogen stores become depleted, so exercise volume is high, that'll definitely spike up AMPK activation. And that pathway there is all around building your aerobic engine. So it increases what's known as our mitochondria number. So that's a primary form of energy driving cell within our body. But it also enhances overall endurance adaptation, as mentioned. On the flip side, if we're doing strength and power work, that'll switch on a completely different metabolic pathway, and that's primarily known as the mTOR pathway. Now, that pathway is all about building, good muscle mass, massive amounts of strength, and really type 2, so your fast twitch fiber, the strength and rigidity of those particular fibers. Now, unfortunately, what happens is those two pathways, AMPK and mTOR, they don't play in the same playground. If one goes up, it switches the other one off, essentially. So there's always going to be a bit of a sort of seesaw interaction between those two. What they've shown, though, through research, is around that 4 to 6 hour window between those two types of exercises will typically lessen the severity of the blunting effect, or the butting of heads. So I guess from an exercise program perspective, that's one thing to consider, is how well spaced are your sessions. If you are stretched for time and you can't necessarily have that beautiful 4 to 6 hour window between, you then need to look at the other variables. For example, are you working the same muscle groups in the same session? So, for example, it may not be great to pair a high intensity run session in the morning with sleds, 2 hours or 3 hours later, as an example. Those kind of simple changes can make a massive difference in terms of how much adaptation you're getting, both on the endurance end, but also the strength and power side of things as well.
Okay, makes sense. Is there a way of like that you've got of like, if someone's trying to decide, should they do more like pure strength work, should they do more of this like muscular endurance, fatigue tolerance type work? Is there a way of determining like what someone should focus on? Is it, if you just can't move the sled, full stop, then maybe you need a bit more strength, but if you can, then Like,
Yeah,
how do you know when? How do you know when you've got enough strength? I guess is the question.
yeah. I mean, that's a great question, and in some instances, like as you said, it will be clear as day. Like if you literally cannot move that strength, well, my friend, we need to work on a bit of peak force for you. But in saying that, when you get down to the finer sort of comparisons, and you're really looking at race performance, in particular, at two different athletes, you can tease this out. So, for example, you can run some basic tests. And when I say tests, like an example, what you could do is, if we used sled as an example. So we could have at race weight. So if it's men's pro race weight, 202 kilos, get an individual as a basic example for a test, get them to do maybe a 20 meter push for time. Then get them to do like a standardized fatigue block. So that standardized fatigue block straight after could mean a 1K run. It could mean, for example, 3 minutes on a Concept 2 bike, whatever, as long as it's a standardized fatigue block that you're testing. And then immediately after that fatigue block, get them to do another 20-meter sled push for time. Okay, so for example, in that first effort, if they've done 20 meters in, say, 32 seconds, and then after that fatigue block, the second set, 20 meters, they've done it in 44 seconds, that time differential will give us, for example, a fatigue index. So with that fatigue index, then we can look at, okay, that's your fatigue index in terms of how much you can retain your strength after a fatiguing block, as an example. So, you may have one athlete that could push 300 kgs on a sled push as a peak force, and that's phenomenal. And you've noticed that they can hold around 85% of that strength, after that fatigue block. So, of the maths, that maybe that works out to be around sort of 250 or 260 kgs. Versus you've got another athlete who pushes 340 kgs as their max sled push. So a stronger individual, yet they can only hold around 65% of that unfatigue. So again, on the math, that's probably around maybe 220-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So again, straight away, although athlete B is the stronger of the two individuals, straight away their ability to maintain that strength and the fatigue is the lesser of the two. So come race day, the weaker individual is going to outperform. So again, you can look at it, those basic tests. You've got a pure strength one. Yep, we need to get you stronger. You can't even push the race weight. Versus you can definitely push the race weight, but we need to work out how efficient you are. And if it's a case of athlete B being brutally strong, 340 sled push, but when it comes time to the crunch, you've got about a power up, a force output of 220. That's not going to cut it under fatigue. So that individual would probably need to work more on the strength capacity side of things.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right. Thank you. In terms of like exercises that someone should do, like say they're losing a lot of time at the sleds, for example, or they notice like that blows them up. Is it more pure sled work that they should do, or do you feel like there are other certain exercises that do carry over particularly well to both the push and the pull?
Yeah, 100%. So I guess again, a great question, and it really comes down to asking the athlete a couple of questions, but also observing what you're seeing as a coach. For example, if the athletes are saying like the limiting factor that they are feeling is literally their quads, for example, on sled push, that they just are running out of steam, that's probably indicative of a bit of a peripheral fatigue type thing kicking into play. Where when I term peripheral fatigue, it's at the level of the muscle. Like the muscle is just not able to tolerate that level of continuous force output. So again, like that strength endurance stuff would be great to work on that particular individual. For other athletes, often find that their commentary is like, my legs felt actually not too bad, but I was just absolutely gassed. I couldn't recover from the run going into the sled. Heart rate was spiking through the roof. So again, that's definitely one thing not to, disregard. Like, you can't just constantly focus on force output for sled. It's how you're showing up and how you're recovering. So other attributes, for example, that athlete, aerobic capacity is going to be a big thing to help, believe it or not, their sled performance. So again, you can obviously do specific stuff on the sled, but even, repeat efforts on, for example, Concept 2 bikes, 10 by 2 minute sessions. People love them and hate them, but that kind of work is going to really help build that anaerobic capacity, which will then translate to a good sled push performance as well.
Okay. But things like squats and deadlifts, for example, as well, would you add those in the program to help with sleds?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So again, people sort of and ah around that kind of stuff because they think, well, surely specificity is king. And movement specificity does definitely have its absolute time and place. But at the end of the day, you've also got to look at what exercises are going to help you develop and express peak force the best if getting stronger is your primary outcome. So when you've got bilateral exercises, so two limbs moving at once, like your back squats, those exercises, bilateral, always put you in a position where you can produce higher peak forces, get stronger faster, versus unilateral exercises. So again, sled push being classically unilateral. And again, when we look at it, working in vertical plane, those movements again put you in a biomechanically better position to get stronger and adapt better to the strength versus horizontal movements such as sled push. So, when you sort of plan out your periodization, you've got to be quite methodical and really intentional around what you're trying to do. If developing peak force initially is your goal, then I'd be leaning towards more those exercises that, as mentioned, bilateral, working in the vertical plane, ones that are going to set you up for success to get high peak force expression. But then once you've got that peak force going through the roof, you then need to convert it into what's going to be race specific. So that's going to be your horizontal force application. So there's no point getting a massive back squat if you can't move that sled well. So definitely comes down to periodization when you are when you are targeting those different movements and how you're applying them.
Okay. And how about exercises more? I mean, I guess is it power work, like more like cleans and snatches? Would you have those in a plan for Hyrox as well?
Yeah, I mean, ideally that would be great. That would be absolutely great because again, you look at movements like your power cleans and your snatches, whole body expressions of power. And again, research shows that those movements produce some of the highest power outputs ever recorded in humans from those movements. So again, of course, you'd ideally want to include them. The downside is the technicality of those particular lifts. So again, coming from an Olympic weightlifting background, I obviously can be quite picky around technique, but then when applying it to different sporting athletes, that pickiness comes, from primarily two main places in my heart. Firstly, it's around injury prevention. You don't want to put athletes in positions where they're trying to lift weights and they just either don't have the mobility to perform these movements correctly. And for example, I reference or I think about my rugby players in this example. So, these players are bashed up every week. So typically like their ranges of motion through things like their wrists, their shoulders, not great. So you've got the option there of them doing weightlifting derivatives or like sort of variations of those movements is great. But the second other point that I'm also conscious of is in order to get those movements, the best out of those movements, they are power movements, like as you referenced. So it's about moving a weight as quickly as possible. So unfortunately, if technique is the limiting factor, you'll find that people are like muscling these lifts and the movement is slow. It's slow and it's a grind. So they're not actually training the movement pattern as it should to get the adaptation that they require. So those would be my two caveats. If you are great at you've got a sound level of technique, or you can do the weightlifting derivatives, then 100%, because those types of movements will have massive transference to things like your burpee broad jump, even believe it or not, your skier performance, like your recovery position on the skier, getting up from the bottom position, you're performing a triple extension, much like in weightlifting. So if you can, or if you need some coaching assistance, find someone that's great in those spaces, and I think that'll add another string to your bow.
Yeah. Okay. Um, you touched on like burpees and the ski there. I was thinking about farmers carries randomly recently. Like, I don't know if you saw like the races at the weekend or at the elite level. Like Sinead Bent, for example, has become quite well known for her farmers carries, and Sean Nobles is
Unbelievable.
particularly impressive. What is it? What is it that they've got that helps them move the farmers carry, like move so quickly in the farmers carriers? Because like people typically just think of grip strength, but most of those guys are doing it unbroken, for example. So they've got the grip strength. What else is there? What's Sean got that's helping him move so quickly over the farms?
I mean, both those athletes, man, oh man, have I watched their farmers carry on repeat. Yeah, I mean, and Sinead's in particular, it just absolutely blows me away, like in terms of the speed that she is moving over
Yeah.
that course. And she's not a big individual,
No.
but yeah, just absolutely phenomenal. So I think, again, Sinead, as an example, a great running background. So you could say, well, she's always been quick on her feet, but not when she's holding 48 kgs. That's not that's not in her background. So I think a number of things, like when you look at farmers carry, and this is a great discussion point, man. A lot of people will focus on, they just think, oh, grip is my limiting factor. Where yes, grip comes into play, but I would actually classify the farmers carry as, if you had to term it, I'd say it's a postural endurance test. How long can you maintain good posture? And when I say good posture, I'm not just talking about sort of standing upright and nice. I'm talking good posture, like running mechanics posture or fast walking posture. How long can you maintain that before things start to crumble? So when we look at it from, I guess, a breakdown point of view, you've got a lot of your posterior chain musculature is king. Your traps, a lot of people just sort of view traps as being the sort of pillows on top of your shoulder. Where they don't appreciate it, it's a full diamond across your back. You've got upper fibers, mid fibers, and lower fibers. And if we look at just that muscle group as a breakdown for farmers carry, upper traps, what they're doing is they're basically, keeping the shoulders in a nice neutral plane, so that the kettlebells aren't pulling you down out of posture. Your mid fibers, your traps, are keeping your shoulders retracted, which is absolutely critical, because as soon as you lose or get that scapular protraction occurring, what's happening is now your biceps, your forearms, your whole arm is in a compromised position, which is then going to, believe it or not, compromise your grip on the kettlebell. So believe it or not, the mid trap is actually going to help improve your grip performance for farmers carry. And lastly, your lower fibers, your trap, again, are going to help maintain your thoracic extension. So people that are weak through that, you'll see immediately, maybe after 20 meters or 15 meters of the farmers carry, they've turned into Quasimodo. They've got that hunchback posture going on. And again, that's greatly going to increase not only the metabolic cost of that station, but again, you're just losing biomechanical efficiency on how to move. So again, those two weapons on farmers carry, I mean, yes, they've got fantastic grip endurance, obviously, but if you take a close look at their posture throughout that station, they are rock solid. They're not leaking energy too much as they go around. So I think from a training perspective, people just really need to appreciate, those aspects of farmers carry as well.
Okay. All right. Cool. Do you I know we've obviously talked about like strength, like pure strength and stuff like that, but people often say like, oh, you should train like just above race weight, like use a slightly heavier wall ball, slightly heavier farmers carries, for example. Do you feel like that's worth it? There's something you should do, or should it be like, if you're going to go heavier, go significantly heavier? That
Yeah,
makes
yeah. I
sense.
mean, yes, 100% makes sense. And again, it's a great question. Like, it's training above race weight, definitely important. It's the old, a boxing analogy. You train hard and fight easy, as an example. What that will do is it will help, develop that fatigue tolerance going into the race as well. It's not gonna replicate it, but it will help it. One thing I guess to be mindful of though is that when you are looking to go well above race weight, sometimes it does really compromise technique, or it results in a completely different technique that you would have adopted normally at a race weight. Okay, so with that change in technique, you're going to be hitting different muscle groups as an example, but you could also be putting yourself in an injury risk kind of sphere. So that's one thing to constantly be mindful of. One thing that we're looking to, we'll often get asked by a number of athletes around like what an optimal race weight is, when I'm looking to put on additional body weight, going into a race. So get questioned around, should I do like a structured hypertrophy training block? And they, so traditional hypertrophy, they're thinking like a bit of bodybuilding stuff. Interestingly, like I did a bit of a self-experiment, an N of 1 experiment with myself. I wanted to put on some more race weight, body weight for the upcoming Auckland event. Around 2 kilos was my goal from post world champs last year. So I didn't perform any traditional hypertrophy training in the gym, like any accessory bicep curls or anything like that. What I did manage to do is I put on that additional body weight through just training at higher race loads, higher station loads. And circling back to farmer's carry, man, like farmer's carry was probably, I think, one of the contributing exercises that gave me that full body stimulus, which then resulted in what contributed to the increase in body weight for me, which was one of my goals.
Okay. Does it have a high fatigue cost to it, doing farmers carries? Like we've talked about on the live streams before, how it can be an indicator when someone is really struggling, that like it often shows up in grip strength and things like that. But does it like almost conversely like cost you a lot in training and impact other areas of training a lot, or not necessarily?
Yeah, great question. I've found, again, I'd love to study this, do a bit of a deep dive further into it. And interestingly, like we had our Auckland event, just recently, and I was in the crowd watching my mate race, and one person who was new to the Hyrox as a spectator, like hadn't seen a Hyrox before, but they were just saying, oh, like, farmers carry this looks like to be the easiest station of the lot. Like they almost get a bit of a break. And they said, and this individual said, all they need to do is carry stuff. So surely it can't be that hard. And I'm thinking, mate, it's globally hard. But in saying that, I find like in terms of a training stress, yes, it's great. I reference it being a global training stress, and it is a huge metabolic stress. But I think the beauty of it is it doesn't induce a lot of mechanical damage as well. Like you're not getting a lot of eccentric damage from the movement. So I think, again, it's a great way to increase overall training tonnage and volume, in a relatively safe way. Granted, your technique is sound, so I think it's a phenomenal exercise, completely underrated by some people.
Okay, interesting. You've got a PhD in genetics, I believe. Is there, and maybe there's not, but is there anything we can learn or apply as like Hyrox athletes from that work that you did?
Yeah, and I guess I'll add a bit of context to that PhD as well. So as mentioned, I was the weightlifting coach for New Zealand, and at the time, we were sort of doing different variations in training, put it that way. So Nigel Avery, the coach that I referenced before, like he trained with an East German method, for his Commonwealth Games and Olympic Games build-up. So as a result, that's the training approach that he prescribed to us. So East German volume training, if you're familiar with that, they love volume. So it's 10 by 10 squats. It's your classic perform 3 times a week. 10 by 10 squats 3 times a week, mate. Great way to get tendonitis, I'll tell you that much for free. But interesting periodization model, because they believe in volume. They in the traditional sense, they never go out go up to like a maximum or multiple maximum efforts during a periodization cycle. They believe that volume will set you up for success. You go through a big taper, and then at the exact point of your competition, you should shine like a bright star, which is a little bit hit and miss because, as you know, like when you're competing, you do need that mental preparation to experience what a maximum is going to feel like. You need to get over all that stuff. Versus the Bulgarian method, which became widely used throughout a number of countries, is almost the counter of that. It's about high intensity, near maximum efforts every single day. And the traditional Bulgarian method in the 70s was definitely supported by their supplementation program to enable their athletes to do that. So a lot of athletes who tried following the true Bulgarian method just could not handle it, obviously, because of the other stuff that the traditional Bulgarians were taking. When I moved into the weightlifting coaching space, I looked at both methodologies, and I'd go overseas and in the coaching halls, at the Olympics or whatever, you get talking to other coaches, and they say, well, what methodology are you following? Is it the Chinese methodology or the Bulgarian? And I'd always comment out, well, it's actually a bit of a hybrid. I saw elements of the volume side of the German program that I really liked, but also liked some of the elements of the Bulgarian kind of system. So sort of created my own. But at the end of the day, these athletes were still training 6 days a week, 3 times per day. So from a coaching perspective, that's what you did. But then from a physiology perspective, I was like, how the hell are these athletes getting smashed in the morning, coming back a few hours later, rinse and repeat, doing that 2 to 3 times per day, and yet still progressing? So for me, like there was a lot of stuff that people had looked at hormonal changes in weightlifters previously. Nobody had looked at what's happening at the gene expression level. And because of that, we had to take a bit of a shotgun approach. We didn't know which gene pathways to target. So we basically scanned the entire human genome to see, out of the 23,000 genes, which genes are being switched on, which genes are being turned off in response to that training stimulus. So we found a whole cohort of genes which are involved in, protein turnover being massively elevated in these weightlifters. So again, I've mentioned this to other people, is that they almost like Wolverine, from X-Men. He gets absolutely obliterated and can regenerate quicker than other people. So that's one thing I identified in that specific unique cohort. But the other thing that was really important to know is we also identified a number of key inflammatory genes being turned on from those exercise stimulus. And typically when people hear inflammation, they immediately earmark that with it being injury and pain and bad, got to get inflammation down. And so that's where things like ice baths, all that kind of stuff come into play, like got to get inflammation down. But the thing with inflammation is it's a key signaling mechanism in your body. It then signals adaptation to take place. So what happens if people, for example, are performing high intensity resistance training sessions and they're jumping into an ice bath straight away after, they're basically turning off the adaptation switch. So yeah, that'll be a primary takeaway for any athlete, in particular Hyrox individuals, is that after these training sessions, you've got to be very, very mindful in terms of how you're prioritizing your recovery. After weights or gym sessions that are designed to improve your strength and your power, if anything, get heat into your body afterwards. Heat almost gives you a double whammy effect in terms of positive gains. Stay away from the ice bath until at least 6 hours post that gym session. That's probably a key practical takeaway from that will translate to any athlete.
Is that you just mentioned specifically like strength training? Is that advice different after like a run-in session, for example?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of, again, the ice will blunt a lot of the signaling. The cold or the cryotherapy, it's termed, is probably more the pathways for the strength and power adaptation are probably more sensitive to the cryotherapy. With the AMPK as an example, ice baths probably won't have so much of an impact on that. And again, it's around you're not going to get the same level of inflammation or inflammatory responses at the level of the muscle that you would from a high intensity resistance training session versus an endurance session, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's a great point.
Okay. You come from a rugby background, weightlifting, like injury can be a big factor in those. Do you have any, like, one or two particular injury prevention lessons that people could use? Like, obviously we've touched on like good technique in cleans and snatches, for example, but anything else that stands out?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like, I guess for us, like especially in the rugby circles, one thing that we did religiously was performing multiple or different types of tests to gauge readiness to train or readiness to perform. So again, a lot of those tests were either range of motion based movements. So for example, testing calf and Achilles range of motion, that kind of stuff, shoulder range of motion, even prior to going into, whether it's a gym session or a field-based high intensity running session. Because again, like we need to know where the athlete is in terms of, are they going to be red flagged or an injury risk? So that's one thing that I think would have definite application in Hyrox as well. And even things like counter movement jump, and there's different devices now that you can use to measure counter movement jump performance. That's a real good indication in terms of not only where you are in terms of your readiness from a muscular point of view, but it's also from a central nervous system point of view, because that's what's going to be driving your ability to perform those jumps really, really well. Other thing, obviously, load monitoring is a big thing to bear in mind with the injury monitoring side of things. And it's not only just the total load that an individual's lifted, but it's around the frequency of particular movements, how often they're doing them. Is that going to be a red flag? And I guess from the other interesting point that I often think about is that Hyrox and weightlifting are similar in a regard. And the reason why I say that is the weightlifting competition movements are snatch and clean and jerk. But snatch and clean and jerk, other sports will use those as exercises or accessory movements. Same with Hyrox. Basically our competition movements in Hyrox are sometimes deemed accessory movements or exercises in other sports. Like rugby players will use sled push as an exercise, whereas for us, it's actually a competition movement. So because our movements are also deemed exercises, sometimes athletes become, and this is the same in weightlifting, that's why I liken the two, sometimes athletes get so focused on just doing those movements. I want to get better at farmer's carries, sled push, lunges, whatever. I'll just do a hell of a lot of those. And they often forget that when you're doing gym sessions, as an example, the gym session is your opportunity to work on accessory exercises that are going to help support the functionality of those key movements. Because injury often arises because you have got a deficit in one of those sporting movements. And as a result, you're doing poor mechanics over and over and over again. Whereas in the gym session, that should be your opportunity to address that poor mechanic to get you more resilient for the actual competition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned at the start there, like readiness tests and things like that. But do you look at heart rate, HRV, anything like that as well before a session?
Yeah, definitely. And 100% we'll give a shout out to, again, Dan Plu's here. I mean, he did his whole PhD in the area of HRV and its regulations. So, Dan and I have worked together across multiple sporting campaigns as well. So HRV, Dan would be in the physiology side, space, and I'd be in the strength and conditioning. So HRV was always one of our foundational measures, when we'd come together and talk about sort of how athletes are currently at. They could be presenting physically relatively okay. They're not showing signs of DOMS or anything like that. Mentally, they're feeling great, but then their HRV is not looking too flash as well. And there's been so many instances where HRV has been able to clearly show us, a few days in advance before an athlete is literally about to crash and burn with either a head cold or respiratory infection, even before the athlete has sort of felt the onset of that really kick in. But in saying that, the data output is only as good as the data input, and we were only able to get those insights because we had such a great amount of data from these individuals, so we could clearly identify solid trends. So if people were just sort of cherry picking when they're doing the HRV and stuff, that's going to give you a bit of misinformation.
Yeah. You touched on like technique, like in weightlifting, you became obviously particularly picky with technique. Do you feel like technique is undervalued at the moment in Hyrox for the stations? And is there like any particular tips on improving technique? Like, should you do a high volume of the station? Should you study video? Should you reduce weight? Anything around that sort of area?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. And I think this is that element is again one of the many elements which I love about Hyrox, and what I'm super excited about is because it's such a new sport. And when I say new, like I'm referencing like traditional versus traditional Olympic sports. When you got traditional Olympic sports, which as mentioned, do so much video analysis, technique, schooling on technique is ingrained. This is where Hyrox, there's so much room to move here as well. Even another study that I'm very, very keen to roll out, and I'm referencing these studies, and that's due to my role. I'm on the Hyrox Sports Science Advisory Council, is looking at, for example, differences in sled push technique. Like what is the optimal way to get that best horizontal force application going for athletes of different heights, as an example. So technique, you do need to look at it through video analyses, but you also need to do it and see what the performance outcome is going to, what performance change has occurred from a change in technique as well. But with the technique, it does involve a hell of a lot of repetition. So as mentioned before, going back to that concept of working well above race weight, yes, it has its time and place. I will say that again, but only if your technique is robust, because or else you're going to be putting yourself at risk of injury here as well.
I was going to ask you about this, but you're on this Sports Science Advisory Council. Like Ralph has been on this podcast and talked about it briefly, but can you tell us a bit about what that is and what your role there is?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a really, really privileged to be on that, because it's something that's just been created, or end of last year. I think it was around end of December. It was officially announced. So this is our first year in term, so to speak. So essentially, yeah, with the Sports Science Advisory Council, we've got people on board from different areas. So I'm coming at it from, for example, a strength and conditioning research point of view. So I've currently, one of my roles, I'm a senior research fellow at AUT University here in New Zealand. And at our university, we've got a designated, institute. It's called the Sports Performance Research Institute. So that's where we've partnered up with our high performance sport organisation here in New Zealand, where we're rolling out a lot of the research that has direct application to sporting performance. So we're not just looking at exercise studies for the sake of exercise studies. We're actually targeting exercise interventions that sports want us to do, that's going to move the needle forward for them. So that's the same approach that I'm looking to do with Hyrox. So with my role at AUT, I supervise masters and PhD students, and this year in particular, I'll be really focusing all my efforts around Hyrox specific studies. So in the past, I've done a bit of a widespread from weightlifting to rugby to this, but now it's going to be specifically Hyrox focused. So yeah, we'll be looking to roll out relatively short-term studies, which could be something as I say simple, but it could be around the sled push technique, which I referenced before, to longer-term investigations, which would be maybe a PhD project, which could be looking at 3 to 4 years in duration, because there's been massive things that we've done in other sports for research, like understanding what the true physiological requirements are, for example, rugby players of different positional groups. And that helps us inform training for rugby because we know what they need to do. Now, again, Hyrox, what's exciting is that, we've had there have been a few studies now coming out in that space, but really understanding the physiological demands and requirements of a singles, a doubles, a relay individual, male versus female, that kind of stuff. We want to collectively really dive into because, again, you can imagine how that's going to move that needle forward in terms of performance and training knowledge.
Interesting. Do you you're also talking at the Hyrox Coaches Summit in London towards the end of March. What will your talks be focused on there?
Yeah, and thanks for the shout out on that one there, because we're really truly excited about that one. It's going to be the first coaches summit, which again just shows the tremendous growth of the sport, and for in March it's going to be phenomenal. So over 2 days, a massive spread of speakers, and I'm very privileged to be delivering on 2 topics. So the first one's going to be around the strength and conditioning considerations for Hyrox athletes. So again, sort of touching upon some of the elements that we've discussed here, so to speak. So for example, periodization, what things you should be mindful of in terms of accessory exercises, how to structure them, why to structure them there, when. But also there'll be elements of injury prevention and things to look out for. So again, the goal is to really understand what fundamental principles coaches and athletes should look to really reinforce to ensure they're, one, robust and resilient to handle training. The last thing you want to have is an injury in training, but obviously they want to perform. And then the second presentation is looking to really unpack the difference between solo, doubles, and relay performance. I'll be touching upon the physiology of that, but not so much so. It's around more so addressing the training considerations for those 3 separate disciplines, because they are complete 3 separate disciplines. And again, with Hyrox's push for 2032 Olympics, I am 100% behind that. I think it would be the most phenomenal thing to have in the Olympic Games. And you can imagine that countries will now be looking to talent scout and talent ID. Are you going to be the next solo Olympic medalists, or will you be part of the New Zealand or whatever country team that's going to bring home the gold in the relay? I think that's going to be exciting.
Do you think we'll see more specialisation in Hyrox, like between the doubles and the singles?
Absolutely, 100%. Like it's yes, it's going to be. You'll get crossover athletes, that do both. But for example, the last Olympic campaign I was involved with, I was with the New Zealand sprint kayak team, and that you've got a K1 event, so it's 1-person kayak versus a K2, 2 people, or a K4. So again, you get athletes that are either only specialised in K4, or we have our greatest Olympian of all time, hands down, Dame Lisa Carrington. She can do all 3, 1, 2, K1, K2, K4, which again is a freakish anomaly. But I think as a whole, you will start to see that divergent where people will be specialising in these events.
Yeah. Aside from that, is there anything? How do you think Hyrox training in general will look different in 5 years' time, for example, to what it does now? Do you have an inkling of how things might change?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Like the changes that we'll see even over the next 12 months are going to be extreme, I reckon. And I think that that comes in part, well, wouldn't say extreme, but there'll be a lot of changes over the next, even the next 12 months because, you know, and this is not about pumping up our tires. You know, it's through the work of, for example, the Sports Science Advisory Council and even the Coaches Summit, because more information, the more evidence-based information that is being released to the public, and that's completely our intention, the better informed people will be to make coaching decisions. And I say coaching decisions that can come down to, you know, in race pace strategy, all that kind of stuff, but coaching also in training. So like what particular things do we need to work on from an individual point of view, as opposed to doing sort of generic, more blanket based training for people. I think things are going to become so much more specialized as we go, which is going to be phenomenal.
Okay. All right. Awesome. This has been brilliant. I'm sure I could ask you a million more questions, but is there anything else you think I should have asked you or you want to talk about? And then also, like, if people want to find out more about you, your coaching, what you're doing with Dan, everything else, tell us.
Yeah. Well, I guess yeah, with Dan, it's him and I, as mentioned, we've always had a really great relationship in terms of, as mentioned, he's come from an extreme Ironman background, has had phenomenal success on the world champ stage and that sport, and you know, so he's done his PhD in HRV training, so he's always been like the endurance king, and then I've sort of been the polar opposite of him for many years, you know, being in the strength and power space and doing my PhD in weightlifters. So that's why we'd worked together in multiple campaigns and have come together for our business in Hyrox. Because again, like it just suits the needs of Hyrox and definitely our athletes we're looking to target and put our background and our experience into our coaching program. So that's one thing definitely love to give a shout out to. But again, yeah, I'm just really looking forward to seeing where the sport goes over the next few years, and you know, I'm very fascinated as to how, you know, the sport will learn from other sports. For example, like what's happening in track and field that we can pull across from a training point of view, or from rugby and team sports, can we pull across to Hyrox? Because again, that cross pollination, that's where sports learn, and that's where sports like grow the most. So yeah, I'm excited to see that space boom.
Yeah, exciting times. Awesome. All right. Well, amazing. This has been super helpful, really interesting. Thank you. I appreciate it. If people want to follow you, where should they go? Did you say that Instagram or anything like that?
Yeah. So I've been on the social media outskirts for, you know, refused to get on that for years, but again, that's something that Dan twisted my arm. So just recently on, but you can get me at dr.adam.storey on Instagram. But again, on Hyrox, if you want to check that out, we've got our website there. But as you mentioned as well, I'll be presenting at the inaugural Hyrox Coaches Summit in March, and that's going to be over in London as well. So if you haven't got your tickets yet, I'd highly recommend you jumping on board there. And probably just one other shout out that I'd like to do as well is that yeah, I'm one of the contributors to the development of the Hyrox 365 coaching courses that'll be they're already launched. There's a level 1 coaching course out at the moment, but we're about to launch level 2. So really want to give a good plug for that particular coaching course, because again, Ralph and Co have done a fantastic job pulling together such a well put together course, and the way it's almost been described is the level 1 is kind of like your undergraduate course. You're going to get a good grounding in physiology, a good understanding around exercise prescription and strength conditioning principles. The level 2 course, which as mentioned will be coming out this year, that can be kind of classified as a bit of postgraduate work. So you almost get into an honors or master's type level for Hyrox. So again, it's completely targeted for athletes that are interested around wanting to train and understand about their training more. But it's obviously targeted towards coaches as well to get some really good fundamental building blocks around that kind of stuff for your athletes and coaches.
Okay, awesome. I've seen the level one stuff, and it's amazing. Like there's a ton of stuff in there. I was very impressed, I have to say. So yeah,
Yeah,
awesome. All
appreciate
right,
it.
amazing. Thank you for this. Brilliant.
No worries at all, Greg. No, I love that. Thank you, sir.